do it that way, but then it depends on what level of threat modeling you actually do and how accurate that threat modeling is, and if you really get a sufficient list of countermeasures from that threat modeling. Yeah. But my point is we can also document common libraries without even doing regular threat modeling. We can have libraries of countermeasures that apply to specific types of applications, right? Enterprise J2EE app, here's the list of countermeasures that generally apply. You take out the ones that don't apply, and then you say, okay, now where is this actually implemented in my application, right? I'm going to talk just briefly about this business logic part of it. One thing that we've also seen is that in that whole area, right, the whole thing that we talked about, that didn't really address business logic vulnerabilities, right? Like price parameter changing, for instance, parameter manipulation. That's not something that you can just figure out from that level of threat analysis. So what we want to do is, again, I'll talk about how you can do this practically. But you take a business process. So here we have an insurance company, okay? So you have a customer who calls into the company. Customer asks for a quote. Phone rep enters this data into a quote system. Policy rep retrieves that from a queue. Policy rep determines the quote, what dollar amount we should give them according to some tables. Policy rep actually creates the quote, and then a manager signs off that it's correct. And that's mailed to the customer, and it's legally binding, okay? So what we say to do is take this, right, business process independent of the application itself, just a high-level business process. And a lot of times, people have already documented this kind of thing for SOCs, right? SOCs narratives, swim lane narratives, that kind of thing. Take the business process and look at each step and say, if I was an attacker motivated to do each of these things, or any of these things, right, how would I do it at that step in the business process? So for instance, we have the manager signs off that the quote is correct. Well, suppose I want to make money by getting a lower quote, or more likely, I want to cause harm to the organization. I want them to suffer dollar losses, right? Or I want to diminish their capacity to make decisions. I want to give them bad data so that in the future, they're not making the right decisions because they're a competitor of mine. Well, what I can do is policy rep bypasses manager sign-off, right? I can say, let's bypass this manager sign-off so that the policy rep creates this quote that's completely out of the ballpark, it's completely wrong, right? Like thousands of dollars less than it should be. And because it's legally binding, as soon as it's mailed to the customer, right, you basically lose money at that point if they accept that quote, right? So this is a business logic potential attack. And we can take that, and when we do the source code review or penetration testing, we can say, okay, this is something that I need to look for in the use cases, right? Because we're looking at it from a business logic standpoint. So this finds things that are only specific to the business process. And how to implement it. Has anyone heard of the facilitated risk assessment process? FRAP? It's basically taking the idea of threat analysis, risk analysis. It's supposed to take several days, and you do it in like a couple of hours. So you get a whole bunch of people in a room, right? You get the developers, security people, business people, throw them in a room, and just do this on like the top 10 business processes, top 10 highest risk business processes. Come up with an output, and you use that when you're doing your review. Okay? Any questions on that? I don't want to go into too much more detail about that, but any questions? Okay, well, that's pretty much the presentation. If there's any more questions about anything I talked about, let me know. I'm going to be around, so you can feel free to just reach out to me. All right, thanks, guys.